everyone. So, I'll give it a quick second for everybody to come in, but for the stream today, we have two topics. The first topic is the data mining project, which I have been working on a lot in the previous week, and the second topic is actually fantasy football. So if that's what you're interested in, stick around. If you're not interested in fantasy football, but you just want to know what it is, that's what I'm kind of going for. It's not really a talk that is specific towards people that play fantasy football, but more of a talk that is towards people that don't know what it is at all. So I'm sure if you do know what fantasy football is, you'll be able to pipe in the chat and help me out with the explanation, or possibly ask some questions that I might not have covered. But for now, that's the plan. So I'm just going to get straight into it. So first off, I've been working a lot on the data mining project, and while I'm talking here, I'm going to get a paint window set up. The data mining project, I'll just do a brief overview, but I have been talking about it a lot. It's basically the idea of taking my deep learning algorithm, deep learning artificial intelligence, that's a neural network, that's a lot of words, but if you've seen my previous videos, you might have an idea of what those mean. And I am adjusting the format of it so that it can take in data and attempt to create an approximate equation that will spit out an answer for a specific variable. So what I mean is if the answer was 6 and it had all of the input variables, it would figure out how the data got from the input variables to the output. And so that's the goal. And so the good news is I have everything coded. The bad news is at the moment I'm still in debug phase. So the debug phase, if you have ever tried coding anything, it's the most tedious and probably the most stress-inducing part of coding, because what happens is you get an error and you probably don't know where that error is coming from, and usually it's not what you're thinking. So what's happening is I'm having to go through the code that I've written previously, which I did actually code a little bit more meticulously than usual. I coded each individual part in a different file, tested it, and made sure that it worked by itself, and then implemented it into the main code that I was writing for this project. And so I went through, I was satisfied with how things were working on their own, and when I added everything together and tried to make them work and translate to each other, there were some problems, so I am working on those, and I'm sure that at least in the next week I will have this attempting its first run at an equation. I'm thinking that as opposed to immediately jumping into the big equation that I've talked about in the past, which would be the long, huge fraction that has a bunch of different square roots and various numbers and operators, I'm probably going to make a relatively simple equation and see if it can handle that first, because this will allow me to more easily debug things, especially if the actual learning process is a little bit faster. So I'll be able to see what long-term problems might occur as opposed to actually waiting the full time it would take to run a AI. So the big things that have happened is that I did strip the AI down a lot. It is no longer the intuitive genetic process. It is just purely genetic, but with deep learning. So I want to see if this can handle the process on its own, because each generation should be a little bit faster with this style. If this isn't enough, or perhaps I believe that there is improvements to be made, I have two things that I can do. I can re-implement the intuitive part, which would be a little bit complicated, but pretty much every aspect of this project has been complicated due to the fractal nature, which I explained in the Wednesday stream. I'll put a link to that for the people that are watching this not live. But basically everything that I did had to be recursive, or double recursive in some places. So that's what I've been working with, but I wanted to kind of just get a prototype, if anything, just to see that I'm heading in the right direction. So this is common practice when you're creating something, is to create a Mach 1 and then make improvements upon there, because if you can actually see how things are working, then perhaps you'll get insight on how you can improve them, as opposed to just sitting at the drawing board and attempting to make the perfect design right off the bat, which I don't think anyone can do. So that the first one is to re-implement the intuitive nature of it, and the second improvement is to add in a new second gear, because previously I had the optimizer in for the ball drop, and although at first I thought that wasn't working, and it actually did end up working, it was just really inefficient. Like I said, it was really inefficient. So what would happen is the optimizer would, if the program was stuck on any particular level of attempting to reach the highest score, it would look at the program it had and see if the if statements could be rearranged so that they didn't step over each other as much. And so it was a smart idea, but the problem was the way I implemented it wasn't very efficient. So what I did was I just took that out. But the second gear that I want to implement for this current project is actually it's actually to somewhat optimize the coefficients that it's creating. So what can happen in the deep learning process is that it can just create constants. So the difference between a constant and a variable, as you may be able to guess from the names of them, a variable can change, a constant is just a number. And so these constants can become coefficients if they are multiplied by a variable, then they're coefficients of the variable. But what will happen is, in the equation that I've written, there are some coefficients, and so but I would imagine in a normal equation there will be coefficients, so the variables will have to be multiplied by some sort of factor to get their true weight and importance towards the equation. And so what I'm thinking will be able to happen for the second gear is that these coefficients can be tweaked like slightly, and then even smaller and smaller and smaller, and get the perfect number or get close to it perhaps. So I'm thinking that once it hits some tolerance for correctness, then perhaps it has the right answer. It just needs to be optimized. And so that's the idea of the second gear. Is the second gear is what's going to kick in after the deep learning process has gotten through the brute force of figuring out the format of the equation. Because the format is the important part. And then it will get the right shape of a equation through this, I believe, 9-dimensional space that it's creating an equation for. But at least for the equation that I'm putting up to it, I can imagine that in a normal data mining process there could be millions of input variables, but that's way in the future. So that's the idea of the second gear, and so these are things I've been thinking about implementing in the future. And but what I want to do is I want to get this current program running. So that's my goal for the next week. As you will have heard from previous streams, my current school schedule allots me about 3 hours where I'm stuck on campus, and I just sit in the engineering building at UCF and code for 3 hours. So I've been getting pretty good progress done. But that's pretty much what's happened with the data mining process. I don't want to drag on too long with this section, because I do have another section that I want to get to. That is the talk about fantasy football. So I'm going to play a quick ad here, and then we'll move on to the section that I have previously discussed. I'm not sure if the ad button is working, so it doesn't let me know if an ad is playing. So I guess I'll give it a few more seconds and I will just begin the talk. So I'll be right back. Sorry about that. So I believe we're back. I'm not sure what's going on. YouTube has just released an update for live streaming, so there's a couple features I'm not really used to. So I guess we'll just have to work with it. But I went and got the random word paper for later because we'll be needing that for the random drawing, which I always do at the end of the Saturday streams. So, I want to get into the first topic, and that topic is fantasy football. Well, I guess it's not the first topic. I did talk about the data mining project, but this is the first non-channel related topic. So, fantasy football, a lot of people will hear about it on commercials. It does have a large following, so a lot of people play it. I personally play it, and a lot of my friends play fantasy football. But for someone who possibly just doesn't know about football in general, or they watch football but they've never actually attempted to play fantasy football, it can be somewhat confusing. So I wanted to just sort of shed some light. And so if you have any questions specifically about fantasy football that you want to ask, please put those in the chat. But also, if you have any questions that you think other people have asked you a lot in the past and you do know about fantasy football but you just want to ask the question anyway, I'm open to that as well. All right, but first off, I have the paint window up here, so I'll be visualizing what I'm explaining. But I guess the first thing is that I should explain how a matchup works. So what happens is you have your team, and so this will be you, and this will be Kevin. And Kevin is also playing fantasy football. So you'll have your team and Kevin's team, and what will happen is you'll give it an interesting name. Usually the names are some sort of pun that is related to possibly a player in the football, in a football team that you like, or perhaps the actual team itself is in the pun, or it could just be a inside joke. So I like the Panthers, so I usually have my team name as Fig Newton because the quarterback is Cam Newton. But this year I have my team name as the Bread Basket because that is a inside joke between me and a couple people in the league, or most of the people in the league. So you have a league, and the league will have a given number of people. Usually it's an even number, so that every week each person has someone they're playing. But what will happen is if there's an odd number of people in a league, you'll have a bye week, so you just won't have to play that week. But what does it mean to play fantasy football? So I'll just explain how the teams are set up. So you'll have now this structure can vary a lot. This just happens to be the structure I see when I play a lot. So you'll have a quarterback. You'll usually have maybe 2 running backs. So that's another running back. And then you'll have usually 2 wide receivers. And now this is where it starts to get, where it starts to vary a lot, is that some people have a required spot for a tight end, and some people will have this as a flex position, which means it can be a tight end, a wide receiver, or a running back. But the league I'm currently in has a enforced position at tight end, so you have to put a tight end in. And then there's also a flex position between wide receivers and running backs. And then the final 2 spots are a kicker and a defense. So first off, I should probably explain what all these positions are. I'm not sure what the knowledge base is of the current viewers, but a quarterback is the person that throws the ball. You would probably know that even if you don't know football. A running back, you can assume, runs the ball, so the quarterback hands them the ball and they run up the field. A wide receiver is the person that the running back usually throws the ball to. The quarterback usually throws the ball to the wide receiver or the tight end. The tight end is also a blocker, so they're just bigger people usually. The running back can also receive the ball sometimes in certain plays. And then this is a flex position between wide receivers and running backs. So this means that you can put pretty much anyone you want in here, as long as they're a running back or a wide receiver. And then you have your kicker, who kicks the field goals if necessary, and the defense, which is just an entire defense of a team. Now, some fantasy teams will have another position in here, which is a defensive player. So we'll put a DP. So this is just one specific defensive player, and so I haven't ever played in a league that has this, but I have seen it, so I just wanted to mention that. So what will happen is you pick. I'll explain the drafting process later, so just assume that you've already gotten a team. So what will happen is you'll have possibly 2 quarterbacks, maybe just one, and so you choose the person you want to play as your quarterback for that week. So it's sort of like have a coach of a soccer team or a football team deciding which of his players he wants to put into those positions, or his or hers, sorry. So then there's these slots, and you have to fill them with players that play that position. So if I had Cam Newton, I would put Cam Newton in. So you'll just fill in your players here, and what will happen is you will get points for that week. And the way you score points is by having your players do well. Now, obviously, you don't have any influence on how those players play, but you as a coach can decide to play someone over another person. So if Cam Newton had a couple bad weeks and I had a backup quarterback, I could put the backup quarterback in as opposed to Cam Newton to possibly gain some more points on the next week. I personally don't think that would happen this season, but you never know. He could get hurt or something. And Kevin will also have his players that he's playing with. And so what will happen is both of you will have points scored based off of the individual players that you have. So I'm going to clear the slate here. So you have your quarterbacks, your running backs, your wide receivers, your tight ends, your flex position, which is just another wide receiver or running back, your kicker, and your defense. Now we need to look at how these individual players score points in this system. So the quarterback can do a lot. So the ways that I'm not going to focus on individual players, because what can happen is if these players actually switch positions for one play, then they can achieve the points of other positions. So I'm just going to explain how points usually work. So what will happen is you will usually get points per touchdown. And so touchdowns are big because in the game of football, that's how you score the most points at once. And so they're very important, and they are usually rewarded fairly highly in fantasy football. Now, in one of the leagues that I play in, you get 6 points. Now, this is a significant number because 6 is actually the amount of points you score when you run across the plane into the end zone to score a touchdown. And so you will normally see 7 as a touchdown, but that's also including the extra point. And actually, with recent changes in the rules of where the kick is taken from for the extra point, a lot of people haven't been either have been missing extra points or have been opting to attempt 2-point conversions, which would make 8 the amount that you score on a touchdown, assuming you're successful. But so some leagues will have 6. Some people think that 6 points is a little bit too significant because this kind of steps on the players that aren't involved in the actual scoring process, but perhaps help in getting the team down the field. So I have other leagues that will give you 4 points for a touchdown. But it is still a significant point process because obviously if you get down the field but you never score points, then you don't win. So that's how the game works. But it can be all these point values can vary, and so but these are the normal slots that points are available. So you have running yards, and usually running yards is pretty straightforward. So in one league I have in one league I have the running yards are you get 1 point per 10 yards. And so the football field is 100 yards. If for some reason someone decided to run when they were on the goal line of their end zone, which actually happens a lot because a lot of times they just want to gain some yardage if they're stuck on their own goal line, then if the running back broke out and ran all the way to the end zone, they would be able to score 10 points from just running yards alone. And then on top of that, they would get the points for scoring the touchdown, assuming they actually got into the end zone. But this is cumulative. So every play that the running back runs, they get points based off of this fraction that is applied. So some people will have this as 25. This, like I said, these numbers can vary, but this is the normal format. There's also receiving yards. So this is rushing, and then you will have receiving yards. Now, receiving yards are a little bit more interesting. So they have the same format as rushing yards. They can be 10 yards. Do abbreviation. So it can be 10 yards, it can be 25 yards, but there is also sometimes a PPR. So what this is a point per reception. So this is a significant total because if there's someone who is on a team where they tend to get a lot of short yards and they catch the ball here and they haven't really gained that much yards, then if they only gain 1 yard but they catch the ball, that's almost like they caught the ball for 11 yards, or if they ran the ball for 11 yards. So if you get what I'm saying, so this is 1 point no matter what, as long as they catch the ball. This actually means that if they were to, for some reason, go backwards and catch the ball here and then be tackled, they could still technically gain positive points even though they lost yards. And so this is why some people don't like the PPR leagues, but I tend to be a fan of them. I just like to see the number get higher and higher, although I don't like it to be overpowered. Some people have leagues where players can score like 150 points on their own, which is just kind of stupid. Oh, God. Okay, so I have the next set of points is, so we have rushing yards, return yard, this is receiving yards. Now, all of these can be achieved by running backs and wide receivers. A quarterback can also get rushing yards. If for some reason the quarterback lined up as a wide receiver, they could earn receiving yards if the running back threw it to them. There are certain plays where that happens, but it's kind of rare. And then also big ones, if your kicker kicks a field goal, then they get usually 3 points, because 3 points is how much a field goal is worth. But what will happen is in some leagues, if the field goal is from further away, so maybe from 40 yards, they'll get an extra point. If it's from 50 yards, then they'll get 2 extra points to make it 5. And it's usually in accordance with their with these yardage divided by 10. So anything under 30 yards is usually just 3 points flat. But then if they're further out than that by 10 yards, then they start adding more. And that usually caps at 60, so 60 plus, because what happens is most kickers can't kick a field goal from 60 plus yards. The current record in a game is 64 yards. I believe that's Sebastian Janikowski, a Seabreeze grad, just like me. But so 60 plus is usually a +3 bonus. So that would be 6 points. And if you'll see, that's as much as scoring a touchdown in terms of fantasy. So a 60-yard field goal is a significant thing. But field goals are important, and if you get a field goal, if you get a kicker that kicks a lot of field goals, then these points start to rack up. I always go for Dan Bailey, the Dallas kicker, because I tend to find that Dallas is good at getting into the red zone, but not necessarily so good at scoring touchdowns. So they tend to opt for field goals, and I get a lot of points. So you have field goals, and then you also have what the defense can score. So the defense can score, obviously the defense can score touchdowns. So if they intercept the ball and run it for a touchdown, they score. This is usually a defense and also special teams. Some leagues only have defensive points, but the special teams is significant because if perhaps a kick returner on the opening kickoff ran the ball back for a touchdown, they would in these leagues that have special teams included, they would get 6 points. And but there's also points for specific defensive events. So if the defense gets a sack, which is when the defense breaks through the line and hits the quarterback. I don't know why the quarterback is behind the running back, but we'll figure that out later. And then you can also get points if the defense intercepts the ball, so INT. Now, these interceptions can result in touchdowns, which would give extra points, but just the baseline interception themselves is usually about 2 points. Sacks are about 1 point each. And this is just what I've tend to see. Now, these can obviously vary. And also fumbles. So fumble recoveries are also worth about the same as interceptions usually. So depending on what the league has set them at. So there's a couple extra things in here. Blocked kicks that can result in points, but usually they're considered fumbles. So it's just a matter of if the team gets the ball back. And then also some leagues have kick return yards. And so this is a significant feature because actually what will happen is if there's a team that tends to allow a lot of touchdowns, this will kind of even it out for them because they tend to receive a lot of kickoffs, and so the 20 yards or so tends to add up. But with the league pushing towards having a setup where the kick returns tend to end in touchbacks more, because there's been a lot of problems with concussions on kick returns. It's just a bunch of people running as fast as they can at each other, and that tends to be a stupid idea. These kick return yards have been dwindling. So finding someone who actually gets kick return yards is kind of significant nowadays. But there are still some leagues that include kick return yards. This can affect individual players. If it were a running back that also returned kicks, then they would accumulate yards. But also sometimes the defensive special team will be rewarded per kick, per 10 return yards or per 50 return yards or something. And then usually the biggest points for a defense, at least in the start of a game, is shutout points. So what will happen is sometimes leagues will have a setup where if the other team only scores, it doesn't score anything, the defense will get a bonus of like plus 10 points. So they'll start out with a base of 10 points. And so this is a significant feature because it's a solid 10 points that can be added or reliable. But obviously most teams tend to score points. It's not like soccer where there tends to be a lot of 0-0 games that drag on and on. So there will be perhaps if the team scores 4 points, which would mean they scored more than just... Oh, okay. If the team scores 3 points, usually there's like a 1 point deduction from this base 10. But if the team scores over 3 points... so this is just basically if the team scores at all, then they lose 1 point from their shutout. If the team scores more than 3 points, which means that they scored a touchdown or they scored several field goals, so that'd be 4 to, I'm not sure, maybe like 10, 4 through 10, then they'll subtract another point, and this will keep amping up. Usually the gaps tend to spread out a little bit more, much like a logarithm. Actually, that'd be the reverse of a logarithm, but that's kind of insignificant for the conversation. So these are big points that the defense tends to score. So what can happen is it actually is somewhat misleading when you go into a game, because the defense will immediately have 10 points. The other team has 0, and these points will start to dwindle away. But usually by then, sacks, interceptions, and fumbles and touchdowns will start to fill in the gaps that the points lost have taken away. So that's the point scoring method. So what will happen is each individual player will get some total for their for that game that week, and then you will have some huge total down here at the bottom, and that's your score for the week. And so you want that score to be as high as possible, because if that score is as high as possible, then you are guaranteed to beat not necessarily. If your players are really bad and you get the highest score possible, then you could still lose. But you want to get players who are good enough so that even if you miss a couple judgment calls, you still score higher than the opponent you are playing. Now, there are a lot of situations where maybe one specific person will score the second lowest, so they're second from the bottom, they are number 2. But then if they're playing the person who is in dead last for that specific week, they still win. Whereas someone who maybe has the best score, the second best score, and then the person who has the best score, if they're playing that week as well, this person with the second best score will not win that week. The person with the best score will win. And obviously the person with the best score should win, but the question becomes whether the person with the second best score should have won, because this game sucked. But that's just how the leagues work, and it's reflective of how the NFL works, because if in the NFL you can't play multiple teams at once. You just play one team because you can't necessarily sync up the scores of a given game and decide that one team played better than another team in a different game, just because they weren't going up against the same defense and a bunch of different other factors. So this tends to cause people to think that they had relatively easy seasons. A team that would go on a relatively good record for that season, a lot of people who don't like those teams would claim that they don't have a rigorous schedule, and sometimes it is true. But how fantasy gets around this is that they usually have small enough leagues to where each player can play each other player at least once. And this means that if one player is completely bad, they auto-drafted and they got a bunch of running backs and they don't even have some positions filled out, then everybody gets a free win from that person and it evens out. So that's the idea. If this person were to wake up halfway through the season, then half of the people in the league would be screwed. But this is just something that is a difficult moral question when playing fantasy. Okay, so now that we know how a fantasy team scores points, we have to figure out how a fantasy team is, how you even get a fantasy team. So first off, you go on to one of the websites. So I know Fox does it. I personally play on NFL.com just because they tend to have somewhat more of a more appealing setup, I guess. Their features are pretty nice. There's also ESPN and I don't know, I think CBS maybe. These are all the different networks other than NBC. I don't think NBC has their own fantasy, but the different networks that actually have football on ever are the ones that tend to have the fantasy football online. So first you have to pick the website that you're going to play on, and then you go on and you pick a league. So there'll be a bunch of leagues and you say, I want to join this one, or perhaps you get a group of friends and you create your own league, which is usually what happens. You usually play with people that you know, just because the trash talk is a lot better. And then once you're in a league, there's a date that you set for the draft. So some leagues auto draft, and those would be heretics. But there are two types of drafts. You have a snake draft, and you have an auction draft. Now, I have not had much experience with the auction draft, but the auction draft is similar to the actual draft that the NFL has, in a sense. So what happens is you're given some sum of money, and then the players are worth a certain amount of money based off of their projections for the next season. So then you have so much money to spend, and you have to decide whether a person is worth it if you want to go get the best player and spend all your money on one person and the rest of your team kind of sucks. Or you can get some good people and try and fill out a pretty even team. Now, the auction works, I would imagine, in the way that a normal auction would work. So what will happen is you will have the option of overbuying certain players, other coaches for a specific player. I'm not sure how the actual format does. Like I said, I haven't had much experience with it. The experience that I've had is with the snake drafts, and the snake drafts are relatively simple. What happens is, usually, at least in the first season that you play, the order of drafting is completely random. So what will happen is all of the coaches will get randomly put into slots, and so this person will be first, this person will be second, this person will be third, and so on. And so this is the drafting order. And you may say, well, that's not very fair. The person who goes first gets to go, gets the biggest advantage because they can get the best player, and then on the next round they can get the next best player available. But this is where this snake idea comes in. So what happens is it goes down the drafting order and then comes back up the drafting order. So what will happen is the person in last, so my league has 14 people in it, I believe. Oh, no, 12 people in it. So the person in 12th in the drafting order obviously can't get the best person usually unless everybody else in front of them is stupid. But then on the second round, they have first pick. So essentially, they have nothing to worry about between their picks. If they want to pick up two specific people and they're still available when they get to their first pick, they can pick up both of them immediately. So it's called a snake because it goes like this and so on. And it's not an oscillatory process. I was just running out of space. But it goes down the drafting order, so 1 through N, and then it goes N through 1, and 1 through N, and N through 1, all the way to, and the number of rounds that you have to pick people is based off of how many slots there are available on your team. So if you are in the league that I'm in, you will have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex position, a kicker, a defense, and then I believe we have 4, I want to say 4 more slots for bench positions. So this is 9, and then you would add the 4 and you get 13. So actually no, there was 15 rounds, so there must be 6 bench positions. And the bench positions are just so that you can pick up extra players, like I was talking about previously. You can pick up more players for a specific position than you need, so that if one person were to get hurt, or in the case of one of my friends, if all of the people were to get hurt, then you have possibly a buffer zone that you can put these people in while you're looking for a better replacement. And so we can then begin the process of understanding how you pick up new players. So the draft is how you get your original team. But then after that, if you don't like your team, or if for some reason the team that was very good last year no longer does well, and you've picked a player on that team, or if a certain player tends to get hurt a lot and they do get hurt, then you will have to find a replacement. Now, if one of your backups is actually pretty good, or if they have a breakout year, then you can pop them into that position. All is good. But perhaps you want to find a new backup if the player that you've replaced is just god awful. So there are many ways you can do this. You can simply look at the players that have not been picked up yet. So this would be the player pool. So you can just imagine that there's all these players at a nice hotel resort chilling out because they don't have to play football, even though they still play. This is just a fantasy. So there's your hotel resort, and everybody's happy. They're like, wow, we're still getting money, but we're not playing. And they're at the pool, and so here's someone that wouldn't be picked up, like Colin Kaepernick. And then perhaps you can look at who is available at the player pool, and you can pick them up. Now, this isn't just as easy as finding someone, clicking on them, and saying, I want this person. Now, in every league, you have a certain amount of people you can have on your team. In my league, it's 15. So what will happen is you can't have more than 15. So you have to go to probably someone on your bench, but maybe if there's someone in your playing field that you no longer want, you can swap this person in the playing pool with so they are dropped from your team, and the person in the player pool is picked up. That's the simplest that it ever gets. In some leagues, there is a waiver, and so what a waiver is basically the ranking of who gets the next player out of the player pool. So there will be a list of all the coaches, and the person who has the highest waiver priority. If let's say this is Kevin and this is Johnny, and Johnny wants this player, but so does Kevin. Well, Kevin is first on the waiver and Johnny is second, so Kevin gets the player. But it wouldn't be fair if Kevin was always first on the waiver. So what happens is when Kevin chooses this player, he loses his priority and drops down on the waiver wire. Now, these can be very complex algorithms for who has the highest waiver. It can be based off of perhaps who's doing the worst, who had a bad week, and maybe if someone needs to fill space. I don't know. I haven't really dabbled around with the intricacies of it. But I believe in my league, it's simply whoever most recently picked something drops to the bottom. So it's not like a reshuffling every week. So then once you're at the top of the waiver, nobody can stop you from picking up a player. And the way this works is the requests are held until a certain day. And then when that day comes around, then it's all calculated. So if someone were to have requested it, and if someone wanted this player, and then a couple days later, this same person, or another person that's higher on the waiver comes and says they want that player, then at the end of the waiver for that player, they will, the person that is higher on the list will get that player. And so they will be able to pick the player up and drop whoever they want off their team. And the other person has to go looking elsewhere, perhaps just for another person in the player pool. But there are other ways that things can, that players can be acquired. So there are also trades. And the way that trades work is that you have your team, Kevin has his team, and so maybe Kevin has one really good player and some bad players. And then you have some okay players, but you want this really good player. And so if Kevin's team is doing bad in general, you can offer him perhaps 2 good players for one of his for his really good player and one of his really bad players, with the hopes of claiming that you can that Kevin will have a more even team, and then you would get this better player, and maybe you have someone on your bench you can fill in for this bad player that is from Kevin's team. So this is something, it's pretty straightforward. The trades are proposed from one player to the other. The other person can either accept or reject that trade, and it goes on like a normal trade would, I guess. Now, in some leagues, and this happened last year in one of my leagues, there is a veto process. So there isn't just this accept and it's all good idea. So this goes to the judge, jury, and the court. And so once the trade is accepted, everyone in the league is notified, or perhaps just the league manager is notified, and they can decide to veto this trade, because there are some cases where trades can be bad. So if maybe you've had a really good season and like your girlfriend is playing in the league, and she is having she's playing against some guy that you don't like, and you're like, okay, I'm going to trade all of my good players to her for 1 week, and then she's going to just walk all over him, and then he'll lose and I'll move into the playoffs. That's obviously a bad moral situation. And so these veto systems are set up to avoid that. But usually what people do is they say that up to a certain point in the season, you can trade, but after that point you can't, because it gets to the point where if you realize that you are not going to the playoffs, you could just tell your buddy that you're going to give him all your players, and then your actual good players, and then he'll be unstoppable in the playoffs. And so we don't want that, and that's usually how that's handled. But that's pretty much all of fantasy. So it's just supposed to be kind of like a fun way of enjoying the sport of football, or any sport for that matter. I believe there's fantasy baseball, there's fantasy basketball, and I'm not sure about soccer or MLS, but maybe. But what this does is it actually allows you to enjoy games that maybe aren't your favorite teams. So what will happen for me is I will watch games now from of other teams other than the Panthers, because there's a specific player that is on that team that I maybe have or I had in the past, and now I just like watching that player. And so it brings a little bit more enjoyment in my eyes to the game. But it also raises some questions, because maybe the player you have on your fantasy team is playing against your favorite team. And so I was just talking to my friend the other day, and he said that if a player is playing against his other team, his favorite team, then he will not put them on the field. And then if you're playing in a league where there's money on the line, then that becomes more of a back and forth question. But I guess what I'm getting to saying is what do you think about how fantasy sports, fantasy football, fantasy basketball, how do you think that affects the way that games are enjoyed? So if you have any comments on that, please post them in the chat or in the comments later. But this is pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I did go pretty long on fantasy sports here, so I'm going to be moving on to my next section, which is the random drawing section. But I will attempt to play an ad. I'm not sure if they're working, and then I'll just give it a little bit to rest my voice and move on. So I'll be right back. And it doesn't look like it's working. All right, screw it. I'm just going to move straight into the next section. I'm going to try and keep this a little bit short because I'm already pushing towards an hour. I don't want it to be too long. But you know the drill. We're going to grab our random number generator. I have it. I don't know if you can actually see it on the screen. There you go. So I'm picking a number between 1 and 25. The first one is 7. We had that last time. The first one is 19. That is a Rubik's Cube. If you don't know that, that's the puzzle box that you can spin. It is usually 3 by 3. Our next number is 7. I don't know why the random number generator likes 7s, but the verb is craft. That is C-R-A-F-T, craft. And the final number is 3, which is depressing. So we have Rubik's Cube, craft, and depressing. Let me clear the slate here so we are not looking at things from the previous topic. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. The Rubik's Cube is somewhat colorful, so perhaps we are making a depressing Rubik's Cube. I think that's what we're going to go for. So the goal of this new section is to make a depressing Rubik's Cube. So we're going to work on that. So Rubik's Cubes, as I was explaining, are 3 by 3. They are, in fact, cubes. And so we will draw a cube here, and you will, for the moment, see this as a layer cake, but it is in fact a Rubik's Cube. Now, I have actually, way back when I did this channel 3 years ago, I actually did a tutorial video on how to solve a Rubik's Cube, because I do actually know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. My friend actually taught me way back in middle school. I went on a trip to Tallahassee. For those of you that are not from Florida, that is the capital of Florida. Most people in the United States would probably know that. It is actually critically acclaimed to have the most phallic Capitol building. If you don't believe me, look it up. It is well worth the critical acclaim. But okay, so while I'm talking here, I will attempt to color in some of these squares. Rubik's Cubes have 6 different colors on them. We need to think of some depressing colors. So I need some more shades of gray. Probably not 50. We'll just stick with 6. So we have white, black. We have dark gray, darker gray, light gray. We'll just get a really light gray. And now we have 6 shades of gray. So a depressing Rubik's Cube would probably be somewhat mixed up, but also not colorful at all. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this true to an actual Rubik's Cube. We'll see if that comes true, but I don't know. So as I was saying, I actually did make a tutorial on how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And so if you are interested in how to do that, you can go look at it. I will warn you, the cinematography is not the finest, but it is effective, I believe, in teaching, and it is nice. It isn't a live stream, so you can actually go and you can actually pause it, rewatch sections. It's pretty nice. So, but I did make that 3 years ago, so just prepare yourself for the confusing ideas. But yeah, so I actually do know how to solve a Rubik's Cube, and I will brag a little bit. I can solve a Rubik's Cube in about a minute, usually longer, but my fastest is under a minute. That's as far as I can go. I don't know the little tricks and things that you can do to just look at a Rubik's Cube and know the shortest amount of tricks, the shortest amount of moves. Actually, if you want to know the minimum amount of moves that that a Rubik's Cube, that any particular Rubik's Cube can be solved in, I believe it's 20. Correct me if I'm wrong. They did a exhaustive proof, so they actually got a computer to go through every single possibility and see how many steps it would take to solve a Rubik's Cube perfectly. The cool thing is that there's competitions obviously for solving a Rubik's Cube as fast as you can, but there's also competitions for solving a Rubik's Cube in the smartest way, and the smartest way is the least amount of moves. So they can take as long as they want. They sit there, they scan the Rubik's Cube, but what happens is they don't actually solve the Rubik's Cube. They will get out a piece of paper and write down the steps, and then someone else will follow those steps and see if it worked. So it's a cool idea. It takes a certain type of mind and a certain type of mindset. But I don't think I'm going to go too in depth in this picture today. I think that we were pretty successful in drawing a depressing Rubik's Cube. I'll add in a shadow here just for a little bit more depressing of a visual. But I think this is the idea we're going for. It's just that it doesn't really have much going on. I have to redo that. I colored in part of the cube with some scratches. Now, when I was actually in middle school, I was one of those kids who had a Rubik's Cube in his backpack, and I was solving it one time. A random person asked if they could mix it up for me. They did so, and they picked off 2 of the stickers and switched them around. I actually did solve it completely to the point where those 2 were the only left and flipped them around, but I was quite aggravated. I still have that Rubik's Cube, and those stickers are peeling off. So if you're that person, what the hell, man? But I think we do have our depressing Rubik's Cube. So, I don't know, we can make a sad face on it. But depression and sadness are 2 different things. It's more of, I don't have much experience with depression, but I do know a lot of people who do. So if you do, please seek help. Obviously, this Rubik's Cube does not have legs, or it does have a mouth. I don't know if it can talk. If it can, it might not be in a language we understand. But you can seek help, so go seek help if you need it. So, on that note, I am going to be signing off. I'm pretty spot on an hour, and I'm glad that I finally got back on schedule with my streaming, assuming that I can keep up the pace of working on the code. I may even have it running on Wednesday, so look forward to a possible viewing of the code in action on Wednesday. If not, I may play a song, I don't know. But we'll see. Wednesday should be a good stream. So I'm going to be signing off for now, but I want to thank you guys for watching. Also, if you haven't been over to my Facebook page, I actually played a song on it earlier. It's Faith by, I believe it's George Michaels. I might be wrong. I actually like the Limp Bizkit version. It's my alarm clock. But so if you don't know the Limp Bizkit version, look it up. But probably have headphones. It's not child friendly. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I'll be coding in the days to come, and I will be streaming on Wednesday. So I will see you then.